Alright, so we've played around with this, we've done some neat things, we got a bunch of toys or objects on our field to play with. Let's talk about some of the items moving and resizing. A lot of different things that can be done with this. So just make sure you're kind of paying attention to all these features, and don't be afraid to try them and come back to this you know, area and just keep trying stuff over and over again. So the first thing, if we want to move items, we can click on an item and we can drag it. Now that will let us move it basically up and down and left and right flat on this board, right? We notice that it's always resting on the ground wherever we move it around on here. Now, this is good because a lot of our items that we print will need to be flat on the surface because the printer prints from the ground up. So we can take items, move them around, rearrange them, things like that. If we wanted to raise the items, maybe we want to stack one item on top of the other, what we can do is we can click on the item we want to move around, and you'll notice that there's a little arrow up here at the top. All right, let me zoom in a little bit more so we can see it. There we go. So notice this little arrow. If I click and raise it, I can actually levitate the item up in the air. So now I can drag it onto here and we can set these up. So one is resting on top of the other. Oh, that's too much. I'm going to try to change my angle a little bit so we can see exactly when it snaps on, and there we go. All right, so that allows us to basically stack items on top of each other. That will come in handy later on. You may also notice, if you played around with the keys, you can move the X and Y axis. Basically, it won't change how high it levitates from the ground, but it will move it up and down, left and right. So we can kind of like move this item on here. Now let's say this is moving too much, right? It's moving too many spaces over and you want to shrink it. If you click on here, we have a snap grid. This allows you to limit or shrink how small of increments it can move. All right, and if you turn it off, it turns it in little tiny micro movements, which are really difficult to see unless you're really, really zoomed in. So you have a lot of flexibility here. So for example, I will turn it off, and I will zoom in, and I will keep moving this over. You can barely see it's moving. Now, if you really pay attention, you can see it just slightly inching over. If I press and hold, then you can kind of see it moving, 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 moving. All right? Maybe that's too small of controls. Maybe I want to do 0.25. There we go. I have little tiny movements here, and that's actually working pretty nice for moving my object. If you want to move into the larger universe, you could make it 5, and now it shifts over in huge chunks. So this is kind of like your control or your sensitivity for how much things can move. All right? So there's also the ability to rotate items. So let me go over here to this state. I think it was Arkansas. You may also notice that if you change your angles, you can see that there's little arrows here that kind of look like arcs. And if you click on that, so I'll click on this first one down here, it shows that we can move it or rotate it or basically spin it. Notice how it's snapping into these little like segments. If I want to give it more freedom, I can drag the arrow out more, and now I can move it one angle at a time. So now I can very finely adjust it. If that's moving too tiny, I can bring the arrow back in, and it'll snap to those grids right here. All right, so that's one way to rotate it. We can also rotate it this way, so we can make it spin however we want. And a lot of this is just playing around and figuring out what kind of freedoms you can build from there. All right. And then also it looks like we have the arrow on this side, and that also lets me rotate it like this. Maybe I want to move it up. And also notice, look, this is even giving me the distance from the bottom of my shape down to the flat surface. So if I'm doing that, I can make sure that it's perfectly leveled and flattened onto the ground, at least in this lower section down here. All right. Maybe if I were to rotate it 180 degrees, we could see, it looks like that's not going to flatly press on the ground either. All right, and again, this movement can also be adjusted if I want to lower the amount of movement. So I can move it in half increments as well. All right, so again, lots of stuff to play around with here. And also, you may have noticed, I learned this by complete accident, if I click on this number, I can actually adjust it. So if I want it to be 0 gap from the floor, I just press 0 and press enter. If I want it to be 15, I can press 15 and press enter, and it will raise it. So not only can we adjust it by dragging it, we can also figure out the text box that is related to it, and we can snap it to whatever height or distance or size that we want. All right. So speaking of size, how do we change the size of these items, right? Because we want these things maybe to be smaller, larger, anything else like that. Well, if you click on an object, let's click on this square right here. I'm going to bring the radius back so it makes a perfectly sized or perfectly angled square. If I click on it, you may have noticed these little boxes here. So the corner pieces will let you adjust 2 sizes at once. So we can make it larger, smaller, we can make it super thin, we can make it wide, whatever we want to do with it. If you just want to adjust one of the sides, click on it, and you can click on one of these black boxes on the spots between the corners. So we can adjust things however we like. And again, I can adjust it right here. So if I want to make this 5 wide, 5, enter, it will snap the width for me. So again, lots of different features on how to adjust stuff. All right, so those are the bottom pieces. What about this top one up here? Well, I can change the height of it as well. So I can make it really short, really tall, and I can make this as obnoxious as I want. We can also combine the ideas, rotate it, and now there's new corners. So now we can adjust our rectangle or whatever we're making to be whatever size or shape that we want. All right, so now we have this weird object. I think I've definitely morphed it quite a bit, and it's looking kind of weird, but that's pretty cool. Let's say I like the shape, but every time I try to adjust this, I just don't get that cool same look. Well, let me undo my shape so it's back to the cool style that I want it to be. If I want to scale this item, basically adjust all the dimensions at once, I'm going to hold the Shift key and then adjust any one of these items. And you notice that the entire rectangle shrinks, not just part of it, not just the size or the width or the height or anything like that, the entire thing. So when you hold Shift, you're basically applying the transformation or the resizing to the entire object. All right, so that's a lot about movement, resizing, all of that fancy stuff. So now what I'd like to do is show you the last piece of the tutorial, which is basically going to be adding and fusing items together. And this is where we're going to take 2 items, combine them somehow, and then we can fuse both of them together. So when we create an object of 2, first off they'll snap to the same color, but now the entire thing is just one solid object. And you can do some really neat stuff with that. All right? And fusing will also allow us to do something called subtractive fusing, where you're going to be able to take out chunks of your designs as well. So we got a lot of stuff to learn, and we got plenty of time to do it. So yeah, stay tuned for the next piece.